It's often incredibly difficult to assess how far you've come in your learning of an artistic skill, because there really aren't any objective ways to measure your progress. But that hasn't stopped me from trying. In the last 3 years, I've sculpted the exact same character 3 times to try and see just how far I've come since the last. So this is my 3rd attempt at sculpting Batman from The Dark Knight Returns. Back in July of 2020, I sculpted this guy for the first time. I really wanted something that felt gritty and real. To this day, I think I captured something pretty cool with that first project, even though it's a little rough when it comes to my technique. By the time I made my 2021 Batman, I had refined my technique a whole lot, and I decided to go blue instead of black for the cowl and cape. I also tried out some leather texture clay, but quickly I kind of figured out it doesn't allow for much control over the details. It did mean that the material looked very heavy, and I liked that, but while that worked for the cape, the gloves ended up being a bit too thick and lacking in detail. I also wasn't a huge fan of the face by the time I had finished, so I'd say all in all, while that year's entry was an improvement in skill, it didn't have the same kind of life to it as 2020's version. So for this year's attempt, I want lots and lots of emotion. And I think I can get that by concentrating on the overall proportions rather than zeroing in on the little details right away. I also opted out of using the leather clay again in order to have more control over the finished product. So a neat little trick I picked up since last time is using this brown clay. It's Aves Epoxy Sculpt. This stuff will harden within 24 hours and give me something really solid to work on. And that's really important because I don't know if you've noticed, but Batman tends to be pretty top heavy, which means that it has a tendency to crack under its own weight, and that's not only not good for the final product, it's also incredibly annoying when you're working on it. Seeing as how I have the most fun with the anatomy on these kinds of projects, I start with the face, mostly because I'm trying to get the hard thing out of the way first, but there's also the aspect that having the proportions of the face helps you figure out the proportions of the rest of the body. Instead of using the art for the comic books for the inspiration, I mostly used the animated adaptation version, which means you get more of an overall shape feel because all of those character designs are much more stylistic, which means that you can see what shapes need to be bigger, what shapes need to be smaller. And one thing that stands out is the fact that his chin is massive. So to keep that consistent, I focused a lot on the expression of the face. I gave him kind of like a stiff upper lip, with his lower lip pressing up. I also tried to give him some stubble, which I would try and define later using gray paint. So after that, it was time for the fun stuff. And by that I mean I got to play around with his anatomy. It's really why I do these projects. So with this kind of Batman, beefy is the word that comes to mind. Giant arms, giant shoulders, big traps, big neck. The thing that would differentiate this from another character, another big character, would be the chest. Keeping this chest small and the posture bad, meaning shoulders forward, gives him that kind of brutish look. It makes him look grouchy and worn down and beat. And this specific Batman just got done with winning a mud fight. So the idea that he's really, exhausted and slumping his shoulders forward is what I was trying to bring forward. One thing I did keep in mind that I learned the hard way from last time is that you have to keep his waist incredibly small, because once you add the utility belt, it makes him look bulky in that area. So if he was already had a bulky waist, which is what I was planning on giving him, he'd look even bulkier with the belt added on. But with the belt, it finishes the look of blockiness, which is really important. And with most of the sculpting done, it was time for a check-in. I'm about finished, I think. I'm about done with the sculpture. I still have to do the cape, but most of the detail on his suit is done, except for the bat bits that go on the side of his gloves. That I think I'll have to bake first. I did a lot of work on this guy off camera, because when I substitute teach for a class, I can bring my project, because it's an art class and it's okay for the teacher to be doing art. The thing is, I don't really want to film in school. It's not really appropriate. So a lot of this stuff was done off camera. The general consensus from the kids is that he looks more like, Hulk than Batman. I was thinking about it, and I think, yeah, I did definitely go a little overboard, but I could say that's a stylistic choice. I think I'll just go with that. It was a stylistic choice. to make him so buff. But buff man, looking pretty good. I've definitely added some refinement from the last 2 attempts. This time, I can already start seeing what I wish I should do next time. With the other times, proportion was the issue. This time, it's a little bit the same thing. The proportions are better. The only thing I would change is I think I would elongate him because he looks too wide. I think this kind of Batman is beefy, but he's still very tall. I think he's supposed to be like 6'8", 6'9". This guy is filling out his frame very well, which means that he's a little on the shorter side for someone this big. Like if you think of someone like Tom Haviland, his torso is very long, so is his legs. He's huge, there's no doubt about that, but something about his height changes the proportions a little bit. This guy is like I took a 6-foot guy's frame and just packed as much muscle on it. So I think next time the work really would be important proportional wise with the skeleton, but over elongating. Like he'll look like Slender Man at first. So I think I'm gonna do that next time, but we're just gonna own the Bane look on Batman for now, and I'll see you when that's done. So this is where the real fun part begins for me. I had to finish up the final details, adding the bat symbol and then the cape. I wanted to keep the cape thick and rough and kind of imply that it was a leathery texture. But after that, it was finally time to bake and then put on a couple textures on top. So I used a mud paste that I just put on the base, his boots, and other places I thought would make sense for him to have fallen and gotten mud on himself. So at this point, I was kind of antsy to get into finally painting. So I forgot to cover up his face and scars, which I wanted to leave the clay flesh color. But I just went ahead and spray painted it gray because I really wanted to see how it would look all in the same color. And it looked awesome. But mid paint, I realized, oh no, I forgot to cover his skin. So I had to paint on top of the gray, which meant that it was kind of washed out, and I just kind of went with it. But the paint job was really good looking. I got to see everything tied together. So you can see me here trying to salvage the face. And I also went over the scars because later the plan was to put blood on top of it. I also forgot to put the bat bits that I mentioned earlier, so I had to bake them and super glue them on. I was actually able to make them pretty consistent, which is a first. Usually they're all wobbly and different, but that one worked really well. After that was done, I finally got to the point where I could put a wash on the gray. I put a bluish gray wash because I wanted it to tie in with the blue later. I went with a light blue this time because I wanted to see what it would look like. It didn't really fit. It was way too bright, but it did kind of remind me of the Batman from the comic book cover. And had I wanted to leave it, I think I could. It would be a justified choice. But instead I just went with the tried and true dark blue instead of black this time. I think it's more cartoony, it's a bit more colorful, and just a bit cooler, I think, to try and put more color into it. And then it was time for the belt. The thing with the belt is every time I have this kind of debate with myself. Do I go full comic book and just make it yellow? But yellow doesn't really wash very well. So usually what I do is I make it brown and then put a yellow wash on top of it. That is what I ended up doing this time. And I also used a kind of sandy color to put colorful dirt on his suit because I didn't want it all to be the same color of brown once I put the wash at the end. It was finally time for the blood. This stuff is really easy to go overboard, so all I did was I put some on the cuts, I put a darker dry blood, then I put a brighter glossy blood on the inside of the cut, and then I also put some on his fists. I also tried to dry brush some blood on top of him, and that kind of worked. Really, the final touch was the painting of the mud. I went with a dark burnt umber and one last little nosebleed, and it was finally done. Okay. Batman's done. I did the first one 4 years ago, I think. I think I've come pretty far since then. A lot of the same techniques, just a lot more refinement. We got a lot of texture going on. He is still very dark. A lot of mud, blood, not a lot of color going on. But I had fun with it. This, I think, and I'm gonna say this a lot. I think every video I say this, but this is the best thing I've ever made so far. I genuinely enjoyed the anatomy. I went way bigger, way heavier than I initially planned, just because I thought I could keep it more cartoony. I think in the past I've tried to go really realistic. That doesn't really work with the things I like making. A realistic Batman, that's been done, but trying to capture the the feel of a Frank Miller comic book is harder and a lot more fun. If in a couple of years I feel the need to make another one, I think I would put more emotion into the face somehow. I'd try and put more emotion into the face and make him taller proportionally. He kind of has stubby legs in comparison to his upper body. So I'd make him taller, his head a little smaller, but with a lot more emotion. Different kind of emotion. Maybe showing his teeth a little bit. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.